Hi, it's Penny here, and today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books that I read in the month of August. So in the month of August I read 7 full-length novels and then 7 graphic novels. So we'll do novels first, then graphic novels. As usual, I am going to be doing this book battle style, which means I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other until we work out the best book of the month. I'm actually going to do a lot of sets of 3 this month just because it's easier that way. So, our first battle is going to be between In the Ruins by Kate Elliott and A Memory of Light by Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan, and The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. So 2 Brandon Sanderson ones in there. But firstly, let's talk about In the Ruins by Kate Elliott. This is the 6th book of a 7th book series called The Crown of Stars. In this, basically, it's an epic fantasy. We have a lot of people fighting over the throne. There's also an impending cataclysm and kind of these dark magicians trying to make it happen up against the good guys who are still trying to figure out what's happening. Obviously this is the 6th book, so things have changed a lot. I really like how the magic in this is like astronomy and maths based, even though unfortunately we didn't really get a lot of that in this book. And another thing I've really enjoyed about this series has been all the different kinds of mythological creatures that are included, like elves, dragons, goblins, mermaids, like pretty much everything you can think of. Griffins, centaurs, like so many things. But again, they weren't in this one so much. And I think the reason why I struggled with this book in particular in the series is that the previous book, the 5th book, kind of came to a big climax in terms of all the magical things, and this one was more about the characters recovering and dealing with the consequences of that, which was somewhat interesting but just wasn't as engaging or compelling as the previous book. And while it did hint at where the end of the series might be going and some of the things that might be happening in the last book in the series, like it didn't really make me desperate to read the last book in the series, even though I'm going to because I'm trying to get to series 0, but like this book, unfortunately, was one of the most disappointing in the series to me. Very disappointing because it's one of the best covers in the series. Anyway, that's In the Ruins. Then I finally finished The Wheel of Time. I did cheat a lot with The Wheel of Time because in the middle of the slog, I kind of just skipped it and read a lot of plot summaries because, as it turns out, The Wheel of Time was not for me. I just don't like Robert Jordan's writing style, even though I think there is a good story in there. I just didn't like the way that Robert Jordan told it. I did enjoy the Brandon Sanderson books at the end a little bit more, but you know, he had to work with what he had to work with, and also like it's in his best interest to try and write it in a Robert Jordan way so that the Robert Jordan fans will enjoy it because that's who the series is really for. So anyway, it wasn't perfect. However, I didn't think the last book was a satisfying ending to the series. I'm pretty sure it wrapped up most of the plot threads, or at least most of the ones that I cared about, and all of the main characters kind of played an important part. We also got quite a lot of Matt, who is my favourite character, and that's the one bit that I maybe think I missed out on when I skipped the middle of the series. So I guess I would say if you have gotten to at least book 9 of the series, you may as well continue, finish it off. I think it's a satisfying ending. It is definitely true that the pacing picks up a lot for the last books in the series, even though honestly it's still really slow. So if you like Robert Jordan's like glacial pacing, you might be somewhat disappointed. But I think for most people, it's going to be a relief. And I actually have been seeing a lot of the ads for the new season of the Wheel of Time TV show. Now, mostly I've heard from people who really liked The Wheel of Time who didn't like the show. What I'm wondering is if you've read the books and you didn't really like them, did you like the show? Because I thought the ads for the show looked a lot better, so I'm tempted. So is it worth it? Should I try it? I don't know. I kind of just want to put The Wheel of Time behind me and forget about it. Anyway, then lastly we have The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd and final book in the Mistborn series. This was a reread for me and I really enjoyed my reread. I do think on my reread I enjoyed the 1st book the most, then this one, then the middle book. The middle book is probably the weakest, as is often the case with trilogies. But anyway, if you haven't heard about Mistborn, actually I didn't give a synopsis of The Wheel of Time either. Ugh, everyone's heard about The Wheel of Time. Honestly, most people have probably heard about Mistborn too. We have these people called Allomancers who can consume metals and get magical abilities from them. Each medal gives a different power, and most people can only use one, but there are these people called the Mistborn who can use all the powers. And also in this world we have the Lord Ruler, who's been the dictator in charge for hundreds of years, and this group of Allomancers is trying to take him down. Obviously, third book, we're in a slightly different position. I think what I love about this series is how much Brandon Sanderson builds upon the magic and introduces so many new elements. Like, really, allomancy is not the only magic going on in this world. There's a lot more, and it's actually the more that I really enjoy. I do think a lot of what I loved about this last book the first time I read it wasn't exciting on a reread, just because I've read so much more of Brandon Sanderson's work, and a lot of the questions that are raised in this book in terms of his magic systems have been explored and answered through some of his other books. So some of the concepts in here that I originally found mind-blowing are just like the foundation of everything else in the Cosmere. But still, I was very satisfied with the way that everything came together in the end. I think this is such a satisfying conclusion for the Mistborn series, and like a large part of why this series is so popular. But I think as well, just the characters in this series feel very real, and that's probably another thing that people love about this series. In a lot of ways, it's quite philosophical in the questions that the characters are asking about the way the world works and about themselves. And I think maybe the way these books are often talked about makes them sound like big action stories, whereas actually they're quite reflective in a lot of ways, as well as having some big action scenes. Anyway, I really love this, and I would love to pick this as the winner of the battle. However, my rule is that rereads can't win. So instead, I have to pick one of the other books. So either In the Ruins or A Memory of Light. And this will probably be a surprise given how much I haven't enjoyed my Wheel of Time reading. However, I think A Memory of Light was better than In the Ruins, just because In the Ruins is probably the worst book of that series, even though I like that series more overall. In the Ruins was the worst book of the series, whereas A Memory of Light was maybe in the top 3, because I would put all the Brandon Sanderson ones at the top. I don't think it was the best. I feel like the 2 books before that had more of an emotional impact than the final book of the Wheel of Time, which isn't really what I think you'd expect. And of course, maybe it would be different for people that actually cared about the characters, which I didn't really. Anyway, the summary is I'm going to pick A Memory of Light as the winner of this battle. Then for our next battle, we're going to have The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin up against Bunny by Mona Awad, up against both A Lion Among Men by Gregory Maguire and Out of Oz by Gregory Maguire. So I just grouped those last 2 since they were in the same series. Anyway, firstly, let's talk about The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. This is a story about these siblings who, when they're really young, they go to this fortune teller and she predicts for them the day of their death. And then the story is divided into 4 parts, following along with each of the siblings and looking at how that prophecy influenced how they died. And I think more importantly, how that prophecy influenced how they lived. I think the overall message of the story is supposed to be that you should enjoy your life, that's more important, you know, that quality is more important than quantity when it comes to life. But honestly, the first 2 characters were somewhat likable, but had so much trauma going on in their lives that it was really painful to read, and I just didn't enjoy my reading experience, even though I did care about the characters, but it was hard going. Then the last 2 characters, the last 2 siblings, were just not really very likable. And I just found myself really frustrated with all the decisions that they were making. So I guess the thing is, I can see how someone could read this and get something out of it and feel inspired to live their lives better. But for me, I felt like instead of inspiring me, it was just like trying to scare me into enjoying my life. And I don't know, that's not what I want. I want to be inspired to live my life. And this was not inspiring. This was painful. It was also written, I guess, in more of a literary writing style, which isn't really for me, but maybe if that's what you like, then maybe you'd like this. And if you like going through really terrible experiences with your characters, again, this could be good for you, but it just wasn't my favorite. Also, it's kind of a historical fiction. It's set kind of in the early 80s through to the 90s. And I mean, I was alive during those times, but I guess it's history now, and it's not necessarily a time that was great for everyone. And I think I'm just discovering that I don't really like historical fiction, or I don't like this kind of historical fiction where it constantly feels the need to prove to you that they've done a lot of research. you know. Then we have Bunny, and honestly, this was a 5-star prediction for me. I've been anticipating picking this up for a while. I know a lot of people that love it, and so many people were like, it's so weird. And the whole premise of like, these are girls that call each other Bunny all the time, and this other girl getting involved in their group. I thought it was going to be kind of like cult-like, and there was a tiny part at the beginning of part 2 which was like everything I wanted this book to be, but it was such a small part. And before that, I just felt like the main character was very judgmental of everything, and I didn't really enjoy reading that from her perspective. And then the second half was just like quite clear that we were no longer connected to reality. I think a lot of people are describing it as a fever dream, and I think that's accurate. Like, if you just want to read stuff that's like so weird it doesn't make any sense, and that there's no real conclusion or point to it, you have to make up your own conclusion or point, then I mean, I can see why people love this, but just it was not for me. I did really like the part with the bunnies. If you've read it, you'll know what I mean. And I wish more had been done with that as well. I'm not talking about the girls who call each other Bunny. I'm talking about the bunnies. Anyway, I love that part. I love the part where it was in first person plural, so it was being narrated as we and us. But that part was so short, and I was just really hoping that the beginning would lead to something amazing, and I don't think it pulled it off. So I was very disappointed, and I was also very surprised to see that the Goodreads average rating is actually really low. From all the people I'd seen raving about it, I thought it was going to be really high, but no. So just know that if you don't like it, you're not the only one. But obviously lots of people do too. So just, you know, keep your expectations in check. Then I finished off the Wicked Quartet by Gregory Maguire. So this is like a retelling of the Oz stories, but from the Wicked Witch of the West perspective, although that was the first book. The second book kind of follows her son. Then the third book, A Lion Among Men, follows the Cowardly Lion, and the fourth book primarily follows a young girl who's kind of involved with the Wicked Witch of the West family. But I just feel like, again, there was really no point to these final 2 books. I know from hearing interviews with Gregory Maguire that he never planned to write these 2 books, and I think it shows. The plot of both books is kind of all over the place, and in the final book, like, I think there was a good story in there with this young girl, and she meets Tip, who, if you know the original Oz books, you'll know that from Tip we get to meet Ozma, the Princess of Oz, and I think that part of the story could have been really satisfying if that's what we'd focused on, but there were still so many other plot threads that he'd built in that were included that just didn't feel important. I guess what I originally loved about this series so much is how Gregory Maguire had taken the original Oz stories and built a fully formed fantastical world around them. And I had recently read all the Oz books, so I knew there was so much potential in that world building. But the final book is really only lined up with the second and third books from the original Oz books. So there's just so much that he never got into, that he could have gotten into. The pacing was so slow. I think in the final book, it isn't until about halfway through that we get a little bit of Dorothy, even though the very beginning of the book set us up to be like, oh, Dorothy's gonna come back. Even though I said the main focus of the story is this young girl, we spend the first quarter of the book with Glinda being just like a noble woman who's lost all her privileges, but still actually retains a lot of privilege. I don't know. I mean, I think it was trying to say a lot of things, but for me, if there's not also a good plot, then it's just not enough. And there's a lot of focus on the politics and the military side of these different parts of Oz that I just wasn't interested in. It's not my favorite. So this is going to be a really hard battle because I didn't really like any of these books. So I think first I would cut out the Oz books because those were the worst experience. If I hadn't been reading them in audiobook form, I don't know if I would have even gotten through them. Then we just have the Immortalists and Bunny. And honestly, like, I would say I think more people would like the Immortalists, but it wasn't for me. So I think I'm actually going to pick Bunny as the winner of the battle, just because there was that section that I really loved. The rest of it was an awful time, but like that little bit I really had a lot of hope for the book in that little bit, so I would read that little bit again. So I'm going to pick Bunny as the winner of this battle. Okay, then before I move on to the graphic novels, let's do a little semi-final where we work out what the best novel I read of the month is. And we have A Memory of Light by Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan up against Bunny by Mona Awad. Honestly, slim pickings this month because I didn't really like either of those. Thank goodness I was doing my Mistborn reread, or the month would have been awful. But how am I going to pick a winner for this battle? It is hard because going into Bunny I had such high hopes. Going into A Memory of Light I had very low expectations. So Bunny was incredibly disappointing. A Memory of Light maybe slightly better than I thought. You know what? I actually thought Brandon Sanderson could do a little bit better with it than he did-ish. And like, if somebody wanted me to reread one of these books, I would choose Bunny for that one bit. So actually, I think I'm going to pick Bunny as the winner of this battle. That is very depressing that Bunny is the best novel I read in the month of August. Again, thank goodness for the Hero of Ages. Anyway, let's talk then about graphic novels. So firstly, I've got the Nightmare Brigade up against the Promised Neverland. I'm not going to say the authors' names just because often there's quite a lot of names against graphic novel ones, and also a lot of these are by non-English people, and wow, I really suck at pronunciation, but the names are on the covers. Anyway, firstly, the Nightmare Brigade. I am really struggling with saying the word brigade. This is about these young kids that live with this scientist who basically, when there's people who keep having nightmares, he will bring them into his laboratory, and then these kids, I think they have other people, but when it's young kids, it's better for kids to go in. These kids, like his son and also his adopted son, will go in to these people's nightmares and try and figure out what needs to be done to like solve the problem that they're having. So a lot of these graphic novels are actually set in people's dreams. There is also a mystery where this adopted son has no memory of where he's come from, and as well the scientist's wife is trapped inside the dream, or trapped inside the head of his ex-assistant, and kind of he would like at some point to be able to get her out, but there's some difficulties with that. And they do also end up kind of bringing in this new girl who starts going into the dreams with them as well. I actually thought the first volume had a lot of promise. I really liked the way that it was dealing with dreams and the mysteries around this adopted son. But then the second volume, it was kind of trying to do an Inception type thing, a dream within a dream, and it was progressing a lot of the concepts, but I also just found it really confusing. I don't know, I think I'm out of practice at reading graphic novels, so it could just be me, but also I just felt, because it is trying to trick you sometimes about whether something's a dream or whether it's reality. So like, it just made it very confusing. Maybe I'm just not smart enough, but also like the art style of these isn't my favorite, and just the storytelling style isn't to my preference. I think there was a lot more dialogue than was really needed, and also things weren't really, I want to say things weren't progressing fast enough, but also like I didn't understand what was happening, so maybe I needed it to be slowed down. Anyway, it was okay. The series isn't finished with these 2 volumes, but I don't know when the next volume will come out or what the deal is with that, so we'll see if by the time it comes out whether I want to continue or not. Then I read The Promised Neverland, and this one I really loved it. I think though I really loved it because I went in not knowing much about it, and then figuring out what the series was about was a very pleasant surprise, although the series is not pleasant at all. I actually thought going in that it might be. Because all I knew about it was that it follows these children at an orphanage, and I'd heard that it was really beautiful, and it kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. At this orphanage, they always have to wear white, they follow a really strict structure throughout the day, they're never allowed to leave the grounds, there's this big wall around it, they're not allowed to go anywhere near the gate, and as well they have these ID numbers tattooed on their necks. So you know there's something strange going on, and when you figure out what it is, I really liked it. But I won't say, even though I think as I go through the series it's going to be hard not to say. But I do think this is very similar to Death Note in the way that it deals with the logic of the characters. You really get taken step by step through their logic as they try to solve the different mysteries that are going on, and like trying to problem solve how they're going to get out of this orphanage. I wouldn't say the art is anything too amazing for most of it, but there are some really good bits. I really wish it was properly colorized, because I do like my bright graphic novels. But there still are some really pretty pages, and like the characters are really cute, all these orphan kids, and there's also some dark bits, which I'm looking forward to getting more of. So if we put these two graphic novels up against each other, obviously I'm going to pick The Promised Neverland, even though I'm somewhat concerned because it's a 20-volume series and now I'll have to read the rest of them. So series 0 just got further and further away. Anyway, then the next battle will be between The Magicians, Alice's Story, and The Power of the Dark Crystal, volumes 1, 2, and 3. So, firstly, The Magicians, Alice's Story. This is basically a retelling of The Magicians by Lev Grossman in graphic novel form. It doesn't really add very much to the story. All it really did for me was make me want to reread The Magicians, even though I didn't really like it. But the story is a good one. But I still feel like this retelling in graphic novel form didn't really get into a lot of the things that the original book did. As it's from Alice's perspective, it kind of focuses on different lessons and different themes, and like it was fine, but I didn't love it. But I do think maybe I will reread The Magicians at some point. I didn't really like it much, but I like that series more and more. Like the third book I really loved, so I'd almost like to go back and reread it with that context. And maybe now that I've kind of reminded myself of what's going on with the graphic novel version, yeah. Anyway, do I recommend the graphic novel version? Not really. Then I read The Power of the Dark Crystal, volumes 1, 2, and 3. This was actually supposed to be a sequel movie to the Dark Crystal movie, which was one of my most favorite movies as a kid. I loved all those kind of puppety movies when I was a kid. Fantastical puppet movies, honestly. The best. And I always dreamed of being Kara from the Dark Crystal and having wings. Anyway, this one is basically a sequel where they've discovered there is this fire nation within their planet, and this fire girl has been sent as a representative to ask for the shard of the Dark Crystal in order to save her world. She ends up teaming up with this gelfling and they try to deal with all the different dramas that are going on. I do think the lessons and the themes of the story was more suited to a younger reader, which makes sense given that these are kids' movies, or it would have been a kids' movie. So the graphic novel is also probably suited to younger readers, but I did really enjoy it. Especially, I think the third volume was the best one in terms of the art being the best, the most bright and beautiful, and the story kind of all coming together. Again, in the beginning, I did feel like the story was a little bit disjointed and hard to follow, but it could have been just me being bad at following graphic novels. Anyway, if you love The Dark Crystal, I think it's worth a read. So, if I'm going to put these two graphic novels up against each other, obviously I'm going to pick The Power of the Dark Crystal. So then, to pick our favourite graphic novel of the month, we're going to have The Promised Neverland up against The Power of the Dark Crystal, and I'm definitely going to pick The Promised Neverland. I just really like the darker elements to it, and I really enjoy problem solving or reading about problem solving, and that's what the characters are doing in these books. So I really enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to it getting darker and darker as the series goes on. And there's like so many interesting mysteries introduced in that first book that I really need to know what's going on now. So I definitely recommend it. And now we're going to put that up against the winner of the novels. So we're going to have Bunny by Mona Awad up against The Promised Neverland. And honestly, this was a terrible reading month. I don't think I realized how terrible it was until I'm now doing this battle. But it's really obvious. I'm going to pick The Promised Neverland because I loved it. But there really weren't many things that I loved this month. And I really thought that Bunny was going to be a safe bet, but it wasn't. Anyway, if you like manga with a little bit of a darker theme to it, so far I recommend The Promised Neverland, but I've got a lot more books in that series to read before I give you a solid recommendation. Do let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video, because I would love to talk with you about them down in the comments. And also let me know what the best book you read in the month of August was. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.